Let's explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome everybody to this week's episode of Breaking History. How are you doing, Gordon?
I'm good, Matt. It's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. We've got a few fun things to talk about. We're going to jump around from time frame as well as spatial distances. We're going to jump into Asia a little bit. We're going to look a little bit about what's going on in probably our backyards here in North America, and also, as always, the purpose of the show is to introduce historic considerations that are always left out, which shape the context of the events that we're seeing in current events. So we got a few different things we toyed around with. I know I've got a little analysis, a little breakdown of Jameson Greer's speech at Davos last week that I thought was very interesting clinically and just contained a lot of important idea content that I want to just talk about and throw your way a little bit for us to chew on and banter about. But also there's questions about breaking developments in China, some very, very concerning developments in Iran that I know you've also written about. So I don't know. Obviously we're going to read the ads for today, but what do you think would be the best thing to start with? Something local or something foreign?
Well, I know we talked about this a little bit before we went live. Definitely, I think what we decided is we're going to do a deep dive next week on the China military coup story, because that's a very fascinating story. It's not something I've actually discussed on my shows just because there's so many other things to discuss, and that's a particular expertise that I think you have that I value your insights on in that whole theater. So I think we're going to do a deep dive on that next week, it sounds like, but I would love to just kind of run through the narrative at the surface level. Because we talked about Mark Carney last week. We're definitely going to revisit Mark Carney this week. And obviously one of the big things that Carney did was negotiated a trade deal with China and then didn't negotiate and then unnegotiated the trade deal with China, right? So that dynamic is fascinating, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this coup story is coming up, straddled by that.
Definitely, it's totally connected. In what specifics we have to, I think, do more work to process and to triangulate in on the specific mechanics. But I think you're totally right. Your instincts, I'm sure, are absolutely correct. I feel the same thing, that this Canada-China dance, if you want to call it that, and what we're seeing now with these ruptures inside of the highest echelons. I mean, it can't be overstated. These are the highest echelons of military decision making in China. Which we're seeing the flushing of a couple of very leading figures that were, I think there was a slug written up by Burning Bright in this morning's Badlands Daily.
News brief.
The brief. Sorry, I always call it the daily. So before we do any of that, I want to just say as well, just to reemphasize, next week we're going to sit down and we're going to really, really hash out much more detail. I'm going to also talk to some of my contacts, both in China and who are just very, very solid China analysts, because a lot of what we're getting in trying to just search the details of what's going on behind the scenes, and this is brand new, a lot of the analysis is coming from a lot of Western press. Vox Media, CNBC, Chatham House, everybody is telling us how to interpret what's going on behind the scenes in China, and that's never a good idea. It's good to always take in the narratives of what are the intelligence agencies creating as creative writers to shape narratives and to frame things so that their audiences here in the West can have a filter through which to view things that's acceptable to the ruling elite. However, that's never a basis upon which truth should be approached in its true sense. So there's definitely something that I would say, well, number one, as a Canadian, actually, before I say anything here, let's do an ad. Let's do two ads, and then we'll get that out of the way, and then we'll jump right into my take as a Canadian on the Canada-China free trade thing, or the not free trade, but the attempted China-Canada special relationship that Carney has been trying to revive. And then we'll go into the Chinese battles and clashes behind the scenes a little bit as well. So the first thing here is Benson Honey Farms. All right, let's have a word from Benson. Welcome to Benson Honey Farms, where every jar is pure gold. Benson's Honey is excited to be back on Badlands Media with their latest 2025 honey harvest, straight from their farm in Nebraska. While they've been busy working to improve our state politics from the ground up, they never forgot the importance of sharing the best honey around. Did you know that honey isn't just a sweet treat? It's nature's medicine, perfect for alleviating allergies, soothing upset stomachs, or as a delicious natural sweetener for baking. Benson Honey is never heated, ensuring you receive it in its pure, raw, full form, full of natural goodness. At Benson Honey Farms, quality and purity is top priority, and they're committed to providing the finest honey from hive to home. Join the supportive community and enjoy a special offer. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/honey and use promo code Badlands for 15% off your purchase. Benson Honey Farms, savor the authentic taste of America and support the American first businesses. Follow on Facebook at Benson Honey Farms. There we go. And the next thing up we have is Badlands Shop. So let's listen to a word from Badlands Shop. All right, happy belated New Year, Badlands family. Let's kick off the golden age with unstoppable action. As your favorite Badlands show wraps up, dive right into the Badlands Shop, where we've curated top-notch sponsors and exclusive deals just for you. From premium USA-made health supplements and grass-fed meats to bold patriotic apparel, secure tech gear, and veteran-owned coffee, we've got everything to power your America First lifestyle to crush those New Year's resolutions. Whether it's on-air spotlights or daily essentials, shopping is easy, smart, and impactful. Every dollar you spend fuels freedom, backing patriot entrepreneurs, family businesses, and creators who share our values. You're not just getting great gear, you're strengthening the movement that keeps Badlands thriving. Thank you for supporting businesses that support Badlands Media. Head over now to badlandsmedia.com/shop to click shop on the main menu at badlandsmedia.tv. All right. So, all right.
I was muted. Can't say enough good things about the Benson Honey Farm people. The family's great. I've met them multiple times at Gart's, and that goes hand in hand with the Badlands Shop concept, which is supporting small businesses, developing the parallel economy, and these parallel systems are so vital in times of revolution, which is what we're living through right now. The American colonists, the founding fathers, developed their own parallel systems years before they actually took over governance. So that's the way that this has to go. So that all starts with your dollars and how you spend them.
Yeah. Amen. So yeah, like on the issue just quickly of China and Canada. So the thing that I think is a good reminder for people is that China, since Xi Jinping entered. So yeah, just a quick recap, right? Xi Jinping enters in 2012. 2013, September, the Belt and Road Initiative is announced as the new foreign policy of China, and a major purge begins. Now, that purge is shaped by the clash. You and I went through that on your Book of Trump a few months back, between the faction represented by Bo Xilai. Bo Xilai was the guy who was going to become the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. So he was the guy who was going to be the top dog in China, in the Politburo, in the Central Committee. It was going to be him. Now, he was part of and groomed by the Shanghai clique of Jiang Zemin. He worked very closely with this nest of billionaires that had sort of grown out of the days when the British Empire controlled Shanghai and Hong Kong as the hubs of the British controls over China, over the opium trade, over the building up of the triads, which utilized a lot of Freemasonic agencies over the course of many generations. They also had obviously a big outlet that was built up after the Cold War in Taiwan. Hong Kong was only given back to China in 1997, but even then, the British still controlled and still control an enormous amount of the banking system, the judiciary of Hong Kong. So it's still known as like the MI6 of the Pacific. Even after China sort of like put down the color revolution of 2019, it's still there. So that's the sort of milieu that Bo Xilai, who is known as the Al Gore of China, was coming out of.
So did he invent the internet too, just like Al Gore?
Possibly. Possibly. Tubes, right? They're big tubes.
Yeah.
Al Gore tried to describe what this internet is that he invented.
What an idiot. Yeah.
So this guy's in jail now. He's in jail because he lost that fight. It was a vicious fight behind the scenes. And Xi Jinping, who we know comes from a slightly different cut of cloth, was able to win the day. And Bo Xilai was taken down. He was given a life sentence or like a 30-year sentence. But that at age, it might as well be life for vast corruption and other things. And with his downfall came a massive anti-corruption program that targeted every echelon of the governing class of China, within military, within banking, within cultural policy, within the Politburo. Something like 5 million Chinese party officials have been prosecuted since 2012 to 2025. That's a huge number. And big people like 2 former ministers of justice, 2 former heads of Chinese Interpol, 3 former heads of the Chinese state security apparatus, which is like the CIA, have been given life sentences or crazy sentences. Some death penalties, like the former chairman of the Bank of China. That's a powerful position. He was given a death penalty that they then converted into a life sentence in 2024 because they're effectively, proven to be assets working against the interest of the Chinese civilization for foreign powers. And, you look at a lot of these case studies. Yep.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Was that the Tiger and Flies initiative, like the Tiger and Flies program that you're describing right now?
Yeah, that's a great name, man. You want to tell people where that name comes from?
Doesn't it come from, because that's like the word that it's the name that I've heard Burning Bright use, and I've looked into it a little bit, but doesn't it refers to the dual focus of targeting high-ranking officials and then low-level, like who are the Tigers, and then the low-level bureaucrats or the Flies?
Yeah,
that's where it comes from.
Yeah, exactly. It's very poetic. And the Chinese, you got to admire the way that they speak diplomatically, and they all have this Confucian poetic. Classical training, so that they introduce these poetic imageries in the course of like really hardcore, serious life or death battles in official diplomatic settings. And you can see like Western diplomats who are trained on a completely different paradigm. They don't know how to interact with all of these like a few months ago, they described the relationship, like because they're reconciling with India. They described that as the dance between the elephant and the dragon. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like the influence of like the U.S. Economic controls over Taiwan and the inevitability of Taiwan's economic integration with China. And they're like, the highest mountain can't stop the flow of the mighty river or something. I
love it. Man. Yeah. Just going Mr. Miyagi like at all times. I love it. Even though I think Mr. Miyagi was Japanese, but that's besides the point.
Your white latent racism is showing.
Yeah, but I interrupted you. You're about to talk about case studies. So please indulge us.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, and this is actually part of the. I wrote a document, a dossier for people who want to really grasp this. Called with my wife Cynthia. We did Breaking Free of Anti-China PSYOPs Volume 1 and Volume 2, going through a breakdown of various players. But you'll find that in all cases. And also our friend Jeff J. Brown, who I'm going to interview on this topic, has done a really good analysis of each of the individual personalities who have gotten really taken down. You'll always find that these are players who, like Bo Xilai, have been assets for CIA, MI6 operations, NED operations that have been incubating and growing insurgency groups for the purpose of pure destabilization. So again, my manual goes through like individual case studies, but that's what Xi Jinping has been dealing with. So to what degree this particular fellow, or actually 2 generals, right? I forgot their names. Liu Zhenli and Zheng. I wrote them down. Yuxia.
Liu Zhenli and then Zhang Yaozai. I can't pronounce.
The X is always like a sh, right? So
Youxia is his last name. Or maybe that's his first name technically. But yeah, Zhang Yaozai.
Yeah, the family name comes first. And they were both expelled from the positions of the Central Military Committee. One was a vice chair, These are, again, very big deal. They were always known as the confidants of Xi Jinping. They were always known as being very close to Xi Jinping and assisting in Xi Jinping's efforts to do crackdowns on the insurrectionary elements within the Chinese deep state. So for me, I still have a lot of ambiguity. I still want to talk to a lot more people to get their take. Is this kayfabe? Is that it could be, or something else going on that touches more directly on different points of view on how to approach British Commonwealth assets, whether Australia and China or whether Canada and China, which are currently going through there's a clear shift on the British imperial terrain in using their different chess pieces on the global chessboard to try to have negotiations with the Chinese elite to say, hey, look, we're trustworthy now. You didn't trust us before. We know we screwed you over for generations under opium wars and try to kill you all forever. And we did all those things, but now we've got a big bad USA that's bullying us. So we're going to change our ways. Saul to Paul, now you could trust us, sign these deals, help, let's dance together now. And I don't know if there's this rupture is caused by different points of view on how to approach that beast. Maybe some people think you can, and I think some Chinese elites do think that they can stay in control by having economic renegotiations, maybe allowing for the market. They can make a lot of money by Canada welcoming in Chinese electrical vehicles. A lot of people think opportunistically that is possible in China and that they can benefit, and maybe they can. It's certainly beneficial for a lot of Canadians if you get economic deals with countries that are really, really building and developing and that want to allow us to participate in that development. That's true, but at the same time,
earnest business partners, partners, and not one side siphoning the wealth of the other away through subversive, backhanded, underhanded deals, which is basically how everyth's been done for centuries at this point.
Yeah. So that, it's entirely possible in my mind that, because I know that a big reason why many of the Chinese innovated institutions that were built up, especially since 2014, such as the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was originally supposed to replace the IMF and World Bank, or be at least that powerful that it could challenge the behavior of the IMF and the World Bank that have been used to impose neocolonialism over the world for 70, 80 years since John Maynard Keynes and his followers took control of them after World War II. So the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank was created in 2014 to bypass the hegemony of the City of London banks over these institutions. But it didn't work out that way. Neither did the BRICS Development Bank, which was also created that very same year. Why didn't they work out? Well, when you look at the governing architecture of who has been positioned to be in influential executive positions within these banks, determining what they're going to invest in on an international level, a lot of it are British nationals, British lords, this or that. And you're what the hell? Britain doesn't even have a say. They are allowed to be members and benefit by being investors in the bank, but they're not allowed by the bank's charter. Only Asian countries are allowed to have a say on the executive board of the bank of the directors. So how is it possible that a country like Great Britain and its subsidiaries are allowed to have such influence, making sure that none of the investments go to where they should go and instead go towards green, boondoggles that don't provide anything? So these
money laundering fronts.
Money laundering fronts is what they are. Yeah. So, part of me is thinking, well, I know the British technique because I live in Canada and I've studied the British Empire quite a bit. Their approach would always be, okay, if they allow for this kind of warming up of very frosty relations, because up until now, Canada-China relations have been cold as ice. We've been, our security apparatus has been blaming China for infringing on Canadian elections, for spying on Canadians. That's why we arrested the Huawei CFO, Meng Wanzhou, back in 2019. She was in house arrest in Vancouver for 2.5 years or so. China, did their own retort by arresting 2 agents of the Canadian. Actually, one was directly working for George Soros. The two Michaels, who were in Chinese prisons up until we had basically a prisoner exchange. Basically, Huawei was illegalized. You couldn't buy Huawei phones. There was the Canadian government intervened to force China to divest of its interests in Canadian mining interests. So that's something that happened under Justin Trudeau. China canceled the Canada-China Free Trade Agreement in 2017. That was like a 10-year-long agreement that was being negotiated, and China just basically said all at once in 2017 in October, like, by the way, yeah, we're not going to do that. And they allowed Justin Trudeau to even fly to Beijing, and nobody went to the airport to visit him, to like welcome him as a foreign delegate.
Many such cases with like Joe Biden, and yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Quick question, because I think you just brought up a good point, and I want to ask you a question. I want to continue like down the path of where you were headed with this, but I just want to take a quick break to ask about what you just said. First of all, going back to the coup thing, as I understand it, the Zhang guy, who is the central character, there's 3 generals that are basically the characters in this coup that they're the story they're telling us. The central guy is like the main guy is Zhang, and then I've seen him described as like Xi Jinping's childhood friend. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that would be a question that I would, if you could run that down for us between now and next week. And the other thing to point out to the audience is, as of right now, there is no evidence that anything that is being described as happening in Western media has actually happened in terms of a coup or it being thwarted. So that, like, when you mention the possibility of this being kayfabe, is this even like a real thing? I think it's important that we don't have any actual hard evidence that anything has actually happened, other than speculation that these guys are not publicly visible right now, and that is what's fueling it. But again, how do we even know that? Or, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people reading there, the speculation is on overdrive right now, because it's kind of like the wet dream that so many of the China hawks have been like fixating on passionately for years now. Every day they go to bed imagining and trying to imagine into reality, invoke almost like like some new agey thing. They've been trying to just like focus on invoking the reality by their collective prayer of a Chinese overthrow to bring in, Miles Guo or something as the savior, the Falun Gong as the saviors of China to bring in liberty and democracy and capitalism or something like that. All of these think tankers and what have you who shape these narratives, they've been obsessing about it so much that they want to believe it. So they read into a lot of detail that you can't possibly know about, and that is probably not even true. But still, the fact is there is legitimate cause of concern, and one of those points is that many of the Chinese. So there's like sort of several strata of elites in China. You know,
that was the next question I was going to ask. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that it's true that many of the billionaire, not all, I mean, China has one of the most quickest growing billionaire classes in the world. I forget the numbers, but it's like 950 billionaires. I mean, people say, oh, it's a communist China. They don't believe in private property and private enterprise. It's like, come on. But at the same time, as they have this growing billionaire class, which is in my mind not a sign of economic health. It's not a sign that you're doing something right. That people,
it's a sign of kleptocracy.
It could go there too. But at the same time, you know that there's a certain tempering, because they also have a thriving middle class and entrepreneurial class. Their middle income class has gone from something like 3% of the population was middle income back in 1997. Today, it's like 54%. That's in 25 to 20, or actually 28 years, is still incredibly powerful growth. Their energy per capita has benefited. Price of energy, access to energy per capita in terms of all kilowatt hours has increased more than any country in history. So you've got, most people are owners of their own property, of their own homes. And once you own a home or an apartment that you can own, you never pay taxes on it. Like you can't lose it unless you're a gambler or something. So like there are, the way that they're thinking about economics, though they might have a lot of corruption. I'm sure that these kleptocrats, a lot of them are kleptocrats, but a lot of them are actual, like we used to have in the West more prevalently, actual entrepreneurs who can become very wealthy by doing business that actually benefits the people as well as themselves. Yeah. So you got that aspect too. Now we know that amongst those hyper rich, like the upper 5% of the billionaire class, there isn't a lot of love for Xi Jinping, because of the economic the corruption crackdowns that he's been leading now for 13 years. So though the population, if you look at the overall surveys of the population, his support is out of this roof. Like it puts Western politicians to shame, because people have such a visceral provable improvement of their living standards, of their quality of life, of their prospects. It's like well over 95% in terms of the general population. But when it comes to the upper elites, the support for Xi Jinping is very low. That's a problem. That means that there is something for Western agencies to work with, to deal with, if they want to, have more freedom to do the sort of things that they were doing in the 1990s, which was like China in the 1990s was basically the wild, wild west. Even up until 2009, 2010, it was still a wild, wild west atmosphere. You can talk to people who have done business, who lived in China. I've talked to many of them who spent decades there working in industry. They all have the exact same stories. It was just whatever goes, right? It's might makes right in the business community. A lot of prevalent drugs, a lot of power to the triads, a lot of things like that. And then things started really snapping. Like the purgings then began and started, cleaning house, draining the swamp, if you want to use that terminology. So above that billionaire class that largely came to power under the age of globalization, because a lot of these billionaires came to power under the age of the rules of globalization post Gang of Four.
Yeah, Henry Kissinger, right? Like Henry Kissinger bringing them in, like getting the markets opened up, right?
Yeah, 71 to 7 or 72. Yeah. Above that, you have the older families, of which there's probably about 90 to 100 or so ruling families that are more trans-dynastic. You could say, because China has these cycles, maybe 350, 400-year cycles on average. I'm not a cycle person. I'm not a Schumpeter circle, but but there's a fact that you have a tendency for dynasties to emerge that last a certain period of time, and then go through the typical phases of what human societies unfortunately tend to go through. Strong men make good times make soft men make bad times make strong men. So you tend to have that problem. If you can't break the cycle, can be broken. But up until now, we haven't, as humans, figured out how to crack that code yet, because it requires a human culture.
Well, and China's unique to like Europe and everywhere else, like even in a lot of ways, even a lot of the Middle East, in that its history is like in excess of 5,000 years, right? I mean, it's history, its actual recorded history is
direct continuity. Yeah.
Direct continuity, which I mean, like in the Middle East, you got to go back to ancient Egypt, right? But then that just drops off. And then you have periods where like history is lost and, like all that kind of stuff, and civilizations collapse, empires collapse. Whereas China, you have just pure continuity of history for like 5,000 years.
Yeah, exactly. And in some cases, like in India, which also has a very long continuity or long history, they have done much more poorly compared to China at keeping a tradition, like an active tradition, to that ancient continuity, and have permitted, unfortunately, the way China has not permitted their enemies to rewrite their history over the course of, especially the British Empire's dominion over India. Yep. The British Empire is much more successful than they were in China at cutting off, at severing its understanding of their deep, powerful, good history. And the British, they don't just erase a history; they introduce a new rebranding of the history for their target victims to think of their history. And like, if you want to study the classics in India, the British want you to study it through the lens of the Kama Sutra. That we could use.
Exactly. But so the question I had that I think will benefit the audience, what we in America have been indoctrinated to believe, I'd say conditioned to believe, especially like in the truth community, like whatever you want to call this movement, is that Canada is in bed with China. China is basically the narrative that was out there a few years ago during the Biden administration was that China basically had soldiers embedded along the border, and they at any given moment they were gonna flip the pigeons, and a bunch of 10,000 or 100,000 screaming Chinese were gonna come rushing through North Dakota and basically conquer the U.S. They remade that movie Red Dawn, right?
Yeah, with North Koreans, right?
Yeah, it was either North Koreans or Chinese, but basically,
the North Koreans it's a way to implicitly get the Chinese, because the reason why the North Koreans can invade the USA is because of China.
Communists from Asia, basically. They're like communists from Asia are going to come and take over like the Midwest. But yeah, like, so that's the narrative that we have like been conditioned to understand, is that basically China is going to get to us through North America via Canada. But that contradicts what you just said about there being this really icy relationship between Canada and China. So before you start to explain that and like unpackage it, I'd also like wanted to bring up some analysis, which may or may not be accurate, but that I was looking at with this Carney thing. And it sounds like there, I saw the red families being brought up. So if you could touch on, explain like what the red families are. And then if you're familiar with that term, versus the technocrats and how those are two different groups. And it sounds like maybe Carney was trying to deal with the technocrats, but the technocrats don't actually really have any real power. So if you could explain like how these different elites, because there's different groups of elites in China, and then the relationship with Canada, and then like, are we going to be invaded by 10 million screaming Chinese soldiers, and when is that going to happen?
We will not be invaded by Chinese soldiers, and despite popular claims to the contrary. And I remember actually watching on Fox News, Gordon Chang, that was the best. Who's
Gordon Chang is a huge purveyor of like these theories. Yes.
Oh yeah. He's something else. I had to spit my coffee out when he was going through his thesis of the Chinese vampires. So it's not only bad enough that you have these Chinese military-aged men, they also have to use that word, right? Not Chinese construction workers in Panama or Chinese construction, because guess what? China's building a shit ton of infrastructure all over now Latin America, and they've been doing it. So you would not be surprised to find Chinese workers in Latin America building ports and rail and things like that. But no, they're not Chinese workers. They're Chinese military-aged men. That's how everybody has to frame the language in left-wing and right-wing press. Gordon Chang came out and said, not only that, but they're vampires, that they've been trained, he says, to drink human blood as part of their development, their training. As
the sustenance comes from drinking human blood. Yeah,
and he repeated that on several shows as well. And it's like it was too over the top. But you could see like how they're working. The fact that people are prepared to believe that though is startling. That they want to, it accommodates a prejudice that we want to believe is true. We want to believe that our enemies are these strange looking, they got eyes that are shifty, they're squinting all the time. You can't trust them, right? They're totally not us.
The mysterious East, right? Like the foggy, hazy, mysterious East. It's ancient in its wisdom, and it's ancient in its danger, because there's all this dangerous mysticism that goes back thousands of years and predates everything we know in the West.
And we just want to believe that they're not human, that they must be must be demons. So it kind of accommodates that sort of language. Also Canadians have been giving their own version of this now for a number of years by mainstream media that's been telling us that the Chinese have stationed soldiers all across Canada. They've been getting trained. The PLA is getting trained in Canadian military bases. Now, none of this is actually true. The thing that you and I have talked about, though, has been that those cases where there have been Chinese soldiers trained in North America, including in the United States, that's true. But what's left out, which again capitalizes on North Americans' inability to differentiate different types of Asians, is that they're Taiwanese. It's part of which is
it's part of the British Empire.
Yeah, basically. I mean, Taiwan has been a floating, aircraft carrier for the U.S. military bases, U.S. military throughout the entirety of the Cold War.
Yeah,
and that was set up by the Kuomintang back in 1949 when they were kicked out and they lost their civil war. So they built up this whole apparatus with the support of the U.S. and the British militaries over 75, 80 years, and so that's what ran the drug trade. By the way, for those who don't know, like the entire CIA control of narcotics throughout the Cold War was entirely made possible by the KMT operations around Chiang Kai-shek that were working with Claude, what's his name? I forgot his name, but the Flying Tigers, the Air America group. So movies like Air America that starring Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. from the 80s.
Oh yeah, Mel Gibson. Right. Yeah, you're right. Well, everyone knows that if you want elite military training, you definitely go to Canada. Like they're going to train the deadliest soldiers. So it concerns me when I hear that China or maybe Taiwan are going to Canada for their military training.
I guess maybe they're training their accountants or something. They're military accountants. I don't know. But it's such a joke. So this is provably, though it's not happening, it's been repeated enough that people believe it's happening. As far as the red families are concerned, So you have coming out of Mao's victory over Chiang Kai-shek, the pretty much everybody who survived the Long March, which was a major strategic maneuver that took place in the middle of or right before, I think it was right before World War II, against the Chiang Kai-shek crowd. Because I mean, it was weird, right? World War II, you had the communists battling the KMT groupings that were more allied. So when the U.S. was trying to negotiate with China, their preference was Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT that were more capitalist in their mindset. They could speak that language. However, they underestimated to what degree Chiang Kai-shek was actually, all of his power was derived from the ancient warlords, the feudal warlord class that was working with the British Empire. Now, so it was these warlords and these warlord families that Chiang Kai-shek, that were very ancient, that Chiang Kai-shek got his power from under the guise of capitalism. And he took the helm from a legitimate person named Sun Yat-sen, who was the first founder of the KMT, which was originally, it had very good foundations. You could say in many ways, much like Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists experience in the early USA, the Federalist Party was like a corrupt den of thieves by and large. Though Hamilton, who founded it, was a good guy who got iced out early on and had no role to play. No, he wasn't allowed to have a seat at the table of the Federalist Party, especially after he got assassinated. So the same thing kind of happened with, I see a strong analog with Sun Yat-sen, who was a Christian first president of China. He like oversaw the overthrow of the Manchus, the Qing dynasty in 1911. And he was actually in Colorado. He was organizing internationally for international support for the Chinese Revolution against the oligarchical class. And he was in Colorado when he got word like, okay, the revolution worked, come back home. And he came back home really fast. And he became the first president for like 2 seconds. And it's unfortunate that he didn't have the type of patriotic organization that the U.S. founding fathers had to work with. So he ended up having to make deals and allowed for one of the top warlords to become the second president. And he gave up his position. He had a lot of power. He could have used it, but he chose to give it up with the faith that within the Chinese cultural tradition, the corruption could be healed in time. That if you give people liberty, they would be able to put these corrupt elements into their proper place. It didn't happen. China basically, it took another 2 minutes for this guy whose name it's slipping my mind, this warlord who was president, to declare himself the new emperor in 1916. He's like, okay, by the way, this whole president thing makes no sense for China. I'm the emperor now. And so that unleashed more civil conflict, but all of these groups, all of these warlords that he was working with, who had gotten their wealth and power out of working with the British in creating the opium wars and creating the opium trade for a century. That was the century of humiliation. They didn't go away. They continued to exert power. And Sun Yat-sen was giving speeches. He was doing a lot to organize the Chinese as well as the international patriots around reviving Abraham Lincoln's policy. And he had a book. There's a book of his speeches called The Three Principles of the People. I read it. It's a fantastic book where he's going through how China must adapt the American system that Lincoln died for to the Chinese context. And it's a wonderful presentation of the need for protective tariffs, long-term strategic thinking modeled on the transcontinental railway of Lincoln. He goes through all of this stuff in 1924. Then he dies. And then that's where you start seeing this transmogrification of the KMT, where a lot of the people who are real lovers of the people, real patriots, real revolutionaries, end up they get so disgusted by the KMT's corruption that they leave and join the communists in the 1920s. And this is like Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai was originally a leading member of the KMT, and he got that guy. And he got so disgusted. Sun Yat-sen's wife, who was like a brilliant woman, she's so disgusted because they could see that this is a group that just wants their own fascist empire, to control China under a new hereditary dynasty. And so they all get disgusted and they end up joining Mao. Mao was also a member of the KMT. He wasn't originally a communist. So you got that's where you got this faction fight within the KMT, within the communists as well, where you have these like Western directed anarchist Bolshevik fascist types who are being incubated and grown as they are in Russia. So what's going on in China and Russia is very parallel. You have networks like this in the USA as well, who are part of these occult agencies. A lot of them are getting support of things like by things like the Green Gang. So just like the Green Gang, which is like one of the top KMT warlord secret societies effectively that run the drugs, and it runs the secret policing operations. It's very much working in tandem with the Russian Okhrana, the Russian secret police, which is representing the interests of the old feudal aristocratic families that want to restore feudalism. But they're also the ones who are grooming these anarchist cells at the same time. Think about how the Western, CIA, FBI operations have been grooming cults in America, or anarchist communes in America, right? It's not that different in the formula.
That's like AOC going to Harvard and at Harvard Business School or whatever, writing a pro-capitalist thesis paper, and then going into politics becomes like a full-blown communist, right?
Yeah, it's such a joke, eh? So it's the same kind of formula, the same game. So you have actual legit lovers of the people who are just looking for an instrument to express power that will help them fight these warlords and these high imperial types. And it happens to be that the instrument that's available outside of the KMT, which is becoming unmanageable, happens to be what's known as the Communist Party in its early stages, which has at first an alliance with the KMT in the early 20s that Sun Yat-sen negotiated. That breaks down fast. After Sun Yat-sen is dead, that's over. So then you find this battle within the Communist Party between the foreign assets, who are just ideological, Marxist utopians. And then you have actual patriots who want to just simply use this as an instrument to save the people and save the ancient civilization of China. And then you got the KMT. And at least the KMT under Chiang Kai-shek is at least not stupid enough to they recognize that at the very least they have to stop Japan, right? And so they have this uneasy alliance during World War II to at least fight the more obvious, clear satanic agency at the time, which is the Japanese fascist empire being sponsored by the Wall Street and London bankers. That's like carrying out mass executions, mass exterminations of the underhuman Han Chinese, of which they see both the KMT and the communists as equally subhuman that should be purged. So they're working together, but they immediately fall back into the civil war, and it results in the communists winning. The KMT go over. The KMT don't say that we lost. They just say that we're going to build up our power with the help of the U.S. and Britain for the coming years on the island of Taiwan until we can go and reinvade and take back control. So they still consider themselves the owners or the controllers of all of mainland China throughout they never gave that up. They always, and so that's why they were recognized as the capital of China was not Beijing, but until 1972 was always Taiwan or 1976 or whatever. So that's an important factor too. But the children, so those leaders of the Civil War had kids. The kids become part of the governing class. This is what you said is the Red families, the Red dynasty. Yeah. Xi Jinping comes out of that. Most of the governing class, most, not all, but most, because they also have a meritocratic system too, which is, I think, a little bit much more fluid than anything we've seen in the West. So in China, because of their Confucian and traditions, which emphasize skill, talent, and creativity to get jobs done and solve practical problems, more so, I mean, we've had moments of this, but it never became institutionalized the way it has in China. They have a much more open, developed method of looking for talent amongst even the poor classes, people born of peasants, who, if you do well on the exams, that everyone has equal access to doing these state exams. If you do well, then you will rise. You will be given more responsibility. And you have many examples of people who are not part of the higher classes who rise in influence and power because they do the job well and exhibit wisdom. So that's a part of above that, though, you have even still some of the older trans-dynastic families. Okay. Some come, some go. A lot lost their shackle, their claws were disembedded with the loss of the KMT that had to escape to Taiwan. So they kind of regrouped, but Taiwan was a lot less influential, a lot less powerful So they always had a beef, a chip on their shoulder, and want back full control. Some of them found themselves in Hong Kong, isolated in Hong Kong, without having allowed to have influence on mainland for many years. And you've got, I don't know, and nobody, unless you're in those circles, you can't really know battle lines per se of those higher families that can go back to the Zhou dynasty. Yeah, we're talking like 5,000 years.
You're talking about the really famous names of people like, Lao Bao, or I forget some of their names, but the really famous names when you go back to the the three big dynasties that were controlling China, or the empires, however they were referred to. But so when I see just like kind of perusing this stuff at a very, very high level, not getting into the weeds at all, when I see the red families described as dynastic oligarchies or like a dynastic oligarchy, they're basically referring to like Mao revolution. They're not referring to the dynasties of the ancient world. They're referring to like the dynasties of the 20th century, basically.
Yeah, typically people take a more myopic view of that term, dynasty.
The CCP, basically. It's like families of this, like the ruling families of the CCP, the elite of the CCP.
Generally speaking, that's how people tend to frame or think about it, the word. Yeah, they're not thinking transdynastic. They're thinking purely this particular, because this really should be understood as the Red Dynasty. That's what it is. Yeah. It's not so much. It's part of the continuity of China's historic flow, for those 5,000 years. So yeah, it's and from within that, then you have, and you were bringing up the technocrat elites. Yes, some of them are.
So let's talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about the technocrats. Yeah,
I guess today's our show, right?
yeah.
So amongst this grouping, part of the problem of having allowed in this Marxist dialectic materialist language, because that's part of the problem, is that though there were many good people who saw usefulness, because there was no other options, if they wanted to have real practical power, the thing that was available to them, other than the KMT, if you were in China, was the Communist Party. So the problem was you allow in a lot of the other Trojan horses within that, including this promotion by Marx and Engels that there's certain assumptions, certain mechanical ways of looking at sociology, social systems, history, that if you're wise, you just say, I'm going to ignore that because that's stupid, but I'm going to use the other mechanical aspects of things to make decisions to get shit done that might be, needed to build a hospital or bridge or whatever, or manage a national, plan. That's fine. But if you take in a lot of the other stuff, like, again, what is dialectical materialism? It's an entire system of thought promoted by Marx and Engels. They didn't come up with it. People say they came up with it. They didn't come up with it. This already was like created for them.
Yeah. They plagiarized basically like everything that they wrote about. They took from other people. I mean, they didn't really come up with a lot of like any new ideas other than just like, let's burn it all down and start something new.
Yeah, like there's exactly. And that's why, like, when you hear Marx say good things about Adam Smith and capitalism, the reason why he explicitly says that he likes Adam Smith's free trade and capitalism is because, unlike protectionism, which Marx even speaks, he says, I'm against the system of Lincoln and protectionism. He's against that, but he likes Adam Smith and the British school of capitalism. He likes that. And the reason why he says he likes that is he recognizes, and he says so, and I quoted from this essay so many times because it's so useful, it accelerates the collapse. He's an accelerationist. Because the more you do, the more you apply the British imperial capitalism of the British East India Company, the more you will exacerbate the proletariat versus capitalist tensions,
class warfare.
Yeah. The wealth will move increasingly to the kleptocratic class at the top under the guise of capitalism. The masses will be more undercut by their living standards. That pressure cooker will build up, and that will then result in the perfect environment for uprisings, out of which he says, we'll go through several phases of the proletariats becoming the dictators. That they do it to the new proletariats. But he says that ultimately there's this theological, or what you could say is teleological, this future moment in the future. That's teleology, right? There's this future moment pulling us into this future utopian bifurcation point, this singularity, out of which a utopia will finally magically happen, and everyone's going to go back to some primitive state of Eden, of kumbaya. Nobody's going to like get messy with private property and the opiates of religion or other things. We'll just be natural savages loving each other and I guess like having communal sex or whatever. Like everybody is going to be everybody's, right? So you got this like weird future state. Part of the other problem, this is going to get it. I'm saying all of this in order to answer the question of the technocracy problem in Canada, because it's like these are the types of considerations people talk about technocracy in China or anywhere without enough context in my mind that is needed to appreciate some of the nuance that I'm going to talk about. The other thing is that it presumes a very rigid, mechanized, that human systems are just like machines. Mm-hmm. And that just like machines which have no free will, you can manage human systems, imagining each person is like a machine with no soul. Souls are just an epiphenomenon of the opiate of religion, which we don't believe in anyway, right? Because we're proper materialists. And thus, all apparent quality, this is the core foundation of dialectic materialism, all apparent qualities that we think as social engineers, social scientists, that we're manipulating or analyzing in the human systems that we're trying to manage, they're not really, they're not qualities per se, they're the effects of quantities. So in the mind of, let's say, like, why is H2O as a molecule wet? Well, they would say, well, it's mathematically because there's this many more electrons and protons versus hydrogen, which is a gas, and it's not wet because there's not. And they'll say it's the quantity of the electrons and the quantity of the protons in the nuclei that determines whether the quality of the thing causes wetness or not. They want, or it's the quantity of the temperature that determines whether the water becomes a vapor or a plasma or a solid or a liquid. It's the quantity of the temperature, but temperature itself means nothing to them. Heat, that's quality, you see. So for them, that is secondary. Whereas for a human, I think, who thinks in a more natural human way, the quality is the primary thing. We assume first that there's qualities in creation, and then we can try to find quantized expressions of those qualities that we can then use and create mathematical languages. But we always have to be aware, if we're going to be productive, like human.
This explains Timu. It's like, let's just make a bunch of cheap plastic crap. We can churn out 10 times as much of it. Everyone can afford a lot more of it. None of it's quality, but hey, like, we're producing a lot of cheap crap, and therefore we must have a really strong, awesome economy.
We must, exactly, yeah, exactly. It's totally, yeah. Or people who just get into fetishes around, like, GDP. The mathematicians, the mathematical economists,
like using GDP to measure economic growth. Yes.
Yeah, that GDP means you're just calculating money flows and transactions. That doesn't mean, like, what's the quality of, like, is the money coming from, like, a drug economy? Are people just, like, going to like bordellos? And that's, like, in the mind of a mathematical economist, they're like, okay, if people are spending their paychecks and they're going to bordellos, and the prostitutes are then using that to buy new dresses and buy groceries, well, that's like moving the powers of industry, and thus it's legitimate GDP. It's like, what the? But
most people don't realize that even in America, government spending and government jobs was like the core foundation, like the core of GDP measurement. And like Scott Best even said that, for the first time, like this year, we're not using any of those metrics. This is all in the private sector to measure our GDP growth. So it's like, all right, well, that's kind of a revelation that in the past it was like, government spending was a big part of it, and then another big part, to your point, is like financial speculation and like those kind of instruments, right? The financial markets, like which aren't actually producing anything. They're basically just gambling on, like, things happening, and it's like a gambling economy. It's like using a casino and saying, oh, look at all the money this casino is generating. That must be a sign of really strong economic growth, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or like look at all of the Montreal, we're like one of the porn capitals of the world, like Montreal and Toronto, like trillions of dollars are being generated by people pouring cash into porn in the porn industry. And it's like, well, that's, again, you're destroying the human soul foundation, the human soul, right? These women could also be, like, they would prefer, if they had a choice, to be, productive human beings making the world better and participating in something great. They're not doing that. We've given them no options. Our economy is so crappy that if you want to make a buck and break the cycle and not, these are the options for you. You can, deal in drugs. You could deal in all of these, like, things that are ultimately going to kill your society. So we lack a future, like, we lack a positive vision, and thus we atrophy and go into these weird places. So all that to say, in the case of, so back to the issue of dialectic materialism. So you have these mechanistic modes of thought that began to be promoted into the Chinese managerial class after especially the 1950 period. And the tendency to think in a utilitarian fashion about managing human systems became quite dangerous. I just thought, okay, I guess you get to step away. One of those problems became utilized by the Club of Rome. So, for example, after the Cultural Revolution, which again is more complex than people realize, there's as I've come to learn over the past couple of years, even the Cultural Revolution is so much more wildly complex and shaped by these things I'm talking about that nobody else seems to want to address. If you want to understand, like, why the hell did that even happen? But it was a terrible idea. That I can agree with. A lot of unnecessary, like the fact that in the Cultural Revolution, there was like this idea of just erasing all of the past. It was a terrible idea, but they basically weaponized young people to start becoming instruments of the erasure of the deep past. Buddhist temples, Confucian temples, scrolled manuscripts, libraries were destroyed. It was terrible, but it was fun. But it was short-lived, and by the early 70s, it really petered out. It had like one summer of terribleness, and then after that, it was like largely moving on the momentum of the bad. But what happened was, thankfully, when Mao died, then the Gang of Four that was using Mao in his old, slightly more senile age was taken down. They lost their protector. They were put in jail. But a lot of the sociologists, the people who were trained in a Marxist dialectic materialistic way of thinking, became they were given new scholarships. They were given new training in Europe, in the United States as well. So they already had a bad method of thinking, but then it was made even worse because when they were brought in, let's say we had this example of the Club of Rome bringing in a variety of these Chinese engineers to, I think it was this big conference in the mid 70s in Finland. It was a Club of Rome conference. And they were able to easily persuade these Chinese highly placed engineers to believe that the Club of Rome's computer formulas for managing population and conceptualizing what is the nature of economic growth and how it should be curbed to accommodate carrying capacities of the earth. This is what's called neo-Malthusian. It's based on the idea of using the Malthus theory of overpopulation and predictively suppressing population to accommodate future population crises, because the idea of Malthus was population will always grow geometrically, food will always just simply grow arithmetically, and because of those two different rates of growth, you can foresee, if you have enough variables, when in the future we'll hit a population crisis. And instead of waiting for that, we should wisely act now to suppress the population with things like, restrictive reproductive rights or what have you, whatever, as Malthus says.
Plague, famine.
All that's on the table. They're all gifts that God gave us to correct his error, I guess. Because that's basically a big, presumption that we're putting on God as a judgment by humans onto God, saying you created a species that, when creative and acting in a divine way, grows too fast for itself to support. And so we have to correct God's error by killing off, So all that to say, it was sold to many of these Chinese elites, and I have in my Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops a whole history of the Club of Rome's infusion through the help of Henry Kissinger into China in the late 70s as part of the negotiation for China to say, okay, well, or to be told, well, okay, you have a lot of poverty. Your life expectancy currently is like 48 years on average. You have got no real relevant industry. You're a third world country. You're still suffering from the opium wars, like the century humiliation. That was the case of China in the 60s. It was growing, but very slowly. It wasn't very strong. High poverty, high corruption. So they were told by Kissinger, okay, I got an idea for you. You can start having the industries and the manufacturing that we have built up in the West, and we in the West are going to transition to the information society. So as we transition, we won't need to do dirty things anymore. We can just have an economy of ideas. Mm-hmm. The reality was that nobody ever had the quality of ideas dropped off when we stopped building things ourselves, because all of a sudden our ideas were dislodged from practical reality in the West. Yep. And you're going to do the dirty work, but you won't really have ideas. You're going to be the economy of doing things, of producing, but we'll use cheap labor in sweatshops, because now your labor is so cheap compared to our well-paid labor that's more educated and that has more advanced economy. So your crap economies are going to make your labor, $1 a day or something, or 25 cents an hour or less. And we'll make money by, and you'll make money. And sure enough, there was an enrichment of some that was a tool of corruption of many of the members of the Red families.
Elite merger, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they said, yeah, we like this. We can accelerate our enrichment, and we'll have the idea of the Rockefellers, David Rockefeller and the Club of Rome and Kissinger basically said, okay, the way you're going to organize this slave economy as being the producers will be the consumers, is that you'll have these special economic zones on the coast in Shanghai and Hong Kong and a few other places, and that you will not develop inland. You will just stay on the coast, exporting to ports that will send your crap, cheap stuff to dollar stores in the West. And that's going to be the arrangement. And it did. It went along. That happened for a while. The 80s were a period of massive growth of both those kleptocrats who made their riches in that period, kind of like what happened in to the Russians in the 90s. It was kind of the same thing.
The aluminum wars, yeah.
Yeah, mass privatization, perestroika, a lot of nouveau riche happened. A lot of but at the same time, the nation of Russia weakened badly in the 90s. Same thing in the 70s and 80s. China was, on the one hand, making a lot of money, but they were becoming less economically sovereign, ironically. And the technocrats that brought in the Club of Rome at the service of these nouveau riche, or at least more acceleratedly rich billionaires that began to grow, they increasingly were introducing things like the one-child policy in 1979. That was part of the negotiation between the Kissinger groups and China to say, okay, we'll give it to you, but you have to do something about your population demographics. They're unacceptable. And so the Club of Rome's modeling was brought in to then justify that. Now that ended up stopping. In 2015, China stopped that. They raised it again to 3 kids. Now they're trying to have like as many kids as possible, but they've done a lot of damage to themselves. So they're trying to make up for lost time by incentivizing families to have more babies. But it's hard to break the habit of 40 years of traumatic, one-child only things. So all that to say that's where I think that a lot of the technocrats that got Soros scholarships. Soros was brought in big time in the 80s. One of his key guys, Shen Yitzi, who was trained in Harvard, was brought back into China to become the right-hand man of Zhao Ziyang. Zhao Ziyang was made the premier of China in 1981. He rose in 86 to become the Secretary General, the top position in the Chinese government. That was Zhao Ziyang, who co-ran a think tank with with his lieutenant, who was Soros' stooge. They ran a Soros think tank, and so Soros had his guy. Right, we went through a whole show on this last year, and so with that came this infusion of tens, if not hundreds of thousands, probably tens of thousands of new scholarships to train new technocrats in the 80s, who then became, against probably most of them are not even aware of what they are. They're just wired to just manage human systems the way, cyberneticist robotics managers would manage a robotics firm. That's how they thought that they could manage human firms. Same thing happened in the West by behaviorists taking more and more control of decision-making. In America under Obama, even under Clinton, they were being brought in. So similar kinds of things,
responding to incentive structures, like, oh, here's a high paying job, and you're going to manage a spreadsheet and you're going to move numbers around on the spreadsheet. Right. But then when you understand what the numbers on the spreadsheet actually represent, they represent sweatshops, slave labor, and the destruction of the human soul, basically, in Asia.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, at the end of the day, where it's really important that this you could map out, especially since the failure of Soros to get his color revolution in China. Because for those who might not have watched our show from last year, that was the June 4th, 1989 Tiananmen Square uprising. Was not an uprising. It was not a freedom movement as we've been told. It was a Soros CIA color revolution which failed, which was supposed to get Soros' stooge Zhao Ziyang to become the full Pinochet-like dictator and savior of the people, after the masses could be induced to burn down and kill as many government soldiers as possible, PLA soldiers, of which there were like 90 burned alive. And you can see the photographs online. It's disgusting. But the idea was to accelerate the mass anarchist movements to force a government violent clampdown, kind of like what they're trying to do in the USA right now, in some ways, and what they've done many times in other countries. It's the formula. And then Zhao Ziyang was supposed to come out against the big bad government as the servant of the people, who people were supposed to rally around and demand that he be given almost imperial-like powers like Pinochet was. And then he could fully do what he said he was going to do, which was like massively liberalize and end protectionism and government regulation in China and bring in freedom. And that was part of Zhao Ziyang's mandate, which it didn't work. It failed. That's one of the few places where color revolution failed. And Zhao Ziyang lived out his days in house arrest. And Shen Yitzi escaped getting arrested because he got the help of the CIA and MI6 and triads in Hong Kong and escaped the hell out of there with hundreds of thousands of other provocateurs who were all given sanctuary in New York, in Florida, in California, in Vancouver, in Australia, in the UK. And that's where you had the formation of what's become today the foundation of like Falun Gong that runs Epoch Times. It comes out of that international movement that failed to get what they wanted in 1989. And then you started seeing a shift whereby the healthier, I guess you could say the patriot movement within China took it much more seriously, what they were dealing with. They allowed the cat into the room of mice a little bit too much, and they realized they had to get the cat out. And they started a new strategy of building up what Zhou Enlai had originally called for, which is basically a revival of the Sun Yat-sen design for the 21st century, but thinking very long term. So they were already planting the seeds for a Confucian philosophical, spiritual revival that they began promoting in their film, in their movies. So the Chinese-backed media, if you look at what kind of movies and shows they began promoting and financing at that point in the mid-90s, you can even watch a lot of these online. They become much more moralizing. They're much more based upon educating the citizen around what is the deep history of China. What evil did the British do in the Opium Wars? And there's actually a great movie from 1999 called The Opium Wars that people can watch with English subtitles on YouTube. It's fantastic. And not only did you have this cultural thing, but you had now the efforts to begin to go beyond copying. So up until then, especially in the 90s, the Chinese were still acquiring through back channel negotiations and things. They were still going along with the idea that we'll be the forever slave labor plantation. You guys will be the superior consumers forever. But they actually had a different plan. And so they would get technology transfers. They would get industrial techniques, right, that they could then use. In some cases, there was espionage, but in a lot of cases, they were just given it by forces in the West in the 90s and early 2000s. But they actually were encouraging pioneering and doing what basically students do when they're in a mentorship program is, you copy the master, whether you're in a guild and you're learning a trade or whatever, you're copying for a period until you can start creative. You own the technical skills sufficiently that you can now begin to start discovering and pioneering yourself. So that's what China always planned to do when they did it well, is they copied, and now they've been out of their copying phase for a number of years where they're like dropping patents and discoveries in high-speed rail tech, maglev rail tech, space tech, all sorts of things, which makes it very difficult for Western, agencies to say, look, the reason why they're doing good is they just steal our stuff. And it's like, well, if they're stealing our stuff, why aren't we doing good? why aren't we developing like that and developing new cities and things like that? And maglev vacuum tube technologies that can go 1,000 miles an hour. Why aren't we doing those things? But they're developing it if they're just stealing from us. And why can't we account for these new discoveries and innovations that seem to be getting patents at it, across China, but we're not patented. So maybe actually we've let go of certain things we should have not let go of about the culture that allows for creative discoveries and innovation. So, that's what I'm seeing like right now. Xi Jinping came out of that milieu. He came out of that fight. And I think they've been trying to train their managerial class to abide by a more cultured understanding of the spirit rather than the just material aspects of like what is in a human system. So that's been the big fight, is the cultural fight, as it is everywhere. But they've been doing a better job at that than we have. For like, I mean, I could you look at the Netflix shows that I'm being given, or that we're all shown that we can pick from, or Amazon Prime shows, Prime Video. In the West, it's all like dystopic crap that we're being fed that's making us worse people. Whereas if I look at the options available for the Chinese audience, when I look for Chinese shows that are out there, you actually have things that we used to do when you and I were young, which is like stories with that. All these stories have moral values, moral lessons. There was always like
uplifting stories to some extent, right? I mean,
yeah.
It doesn't mean it's like all sunshine and rainbows, but I mean, like, there's actually a moral lesson that's being conveyed.
Yeah, they're trying,
even in like dark storytelling, right? Storytelling that's not necessarily sunshine and rainbows. So we have about 20 minutes left, 15, 20 minutes left. I wanted to shift to Mark Carney because I think that this, given all the attention we've given to him, it makes sense to kind of recap what's happened in the past week. So a week ago, I think at that point we certainly were talking about what was happening at the World Economic Forum, where Carney went and basically laid down the law as he saw it, and called out this populist movement in America that threatened the central banking system, as he sees it, and how basically like the elites needed to reorganize, and not that they hadn't already been trying to do that, but they needed to address this. He went to China and announced that they were negotiating a deal that revolved around tariffs. And it's hard to actually find these articles now, because the articles have been kind of edited and plastered over. But I think I have one right here. Yeah, okay. I have one right here that's backdated. Let me share this. And so here's one from, I think this is from the South China something outlet. And
South China Morning Post.
Yeah, Morning Post. And it says, Canada, China hit reset button on relations with tariff agreement. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced the deal, which features a mutual reduction in tariffs on goods, including Chinese electric vehicles. So this was like highly publicized and basically presented to us, this is January 16th, presented to us as, Carney is shifting away from Europe and the global and America and going to China, right? And now going to China for for an economic alliance. And then that led to Trump, here's Business Insider, threatening Canada with 100% tariffs over the Beijing trade deal. I actually have his post. Let me pull up his post let me see if I have the right tab. This is sometimes hard to. Where is that tab? Right here. Okay, so here's the post that he puts on True Social. If Governor Carney thinks he is going, and remember, Trump then gets up and speaks the next day. This Tuesday, Carney speaks. The next day, Wednesday, Trump flies to Switzerland. He gets up and speaks, and even during his speech, he like stops and looks right at Mark Carney, who's in the audience, and says, "Mark, next time, like think before you speak." Which totally calls him out, right? And so we get this really direct, like even the MSM is like talking about it. The mainstream media is talking about this conflict between Trump and Carney. And so Trump says if Governor Carney thinks he's going to make Canada a drop-off point for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. China will eat Canada alive, completely devour it, including the destruction of their businesses, social fabric, and general way of life. If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the U.S. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And this immediately leads to Mark Carney making this statement.
Trump's threats about 100% tariffs.
Well, the first thing is that
Yeah, Canada respects our engagements, our commitments. Il y a des engagements dans l'ACM. We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy. What we've done with China is to rectify some issues that developed in the last couple of years. In many respects, we're going, to use the expression, back to the future with respect to EVs, with respect to agriculture, with respect to fish products and other food products, but with additional protections. So for example, back in 2023, we didn't have a cap on the number of EVs. We didn't have a requirement for a large proportion of those EVs to be affordable, highly affordable EVs for Canadians. So it's entirely consistent with CUSMA, with our obligations, which we very much respect under CUSMA and will continue to work.
Yeah, and so basically let's see, it says from Reuters, Canada respects its commitments under USMCA. And basically it's Carney walking back this deal that he had publicized with China. And so the thing that happens kind of between, I think that video was from a few days ago. And so basically what happens is between that last week when we spoke last and this week, in addition to that development between Trump and Carney, you also have this story in China where there was allegedly a military coup attempt against Xi Jinping. And then now there's people have been arrested and they're being investigated. And we don't know what the truth is. We don't know if anything even actually happened. But again, the coincidence here, it can't be a coincidence. There has to be, even if we're being told a story regarding the coups and those three guys are not actually arrested and they're actually totally loyal to Xi Jinping, for some reason we're being told this story. And I think understanding why, we're not going to figure that out in the next 10 or 10 minutes, but that's hopefully maybe what we'll discuss more in depth next week. But yeah, your thoughts on Carney and what developed over the past week.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. He's trying to. It's a very difficult tune he's having to dance to because he has a mandate. Of course, there's a purpose that he was inserted to replace Justin. It's very rare that we find such a highly vetted, highly competent arch technocrat. His brother is in charge of managing the estates for Prince William and Kate, who, so it shows you that you've got a very, very high up into the echelons of power brother, two brothers, not even fully sure how. I know their fathers their father played a certain service to the Gnostic Vatican chivalric sort of institutions embedded within the Canadian governing class in the 1960s, 70s. But I haven't done, it still is not something I can fully account for how these two Canadians would be given such prestige, privilege and power. Jeffrey Sachs might play a role in that. Jeffrey Sachs, who played such a key role in overseeing the destruction of Russia in the 1990s, though he's now rebranded himself as a champion of the people, and I think a very Delphic, dishonest rebranding. He was one of the early teachers, professors of Mark Carney, and has bragged about how proud he is of his star pupil.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's why I was struck when I just found out that he said that this weekend. And when I heard Mark Carney's speech at Davos, I remember telling you, I was like, it sounds almost like Jeffrey Sachs gave that speech. It didn't sound like anything from Mark Carney. And then when I heard Jeffrey Sachs bragging about how Carney was his star pupil, I was like, oh, okay.
Now it makes sense. Yeah,
I get it. Yeah. So I think Jeffrey Sachs gives us an insight into the upper levels of the oligarchies thinking or strategic thinking at this moment in history, because he has been put out there about 2 years ago to start becoming an influencer of a new type of a rebranded critique of oligarchical rules-based order mismanagement of the world. It was recognized increasingly that the old New World Order designs were not really working, and they needed to sort of shift the trajectory of this monstrosity that they built up over generations that was like it has a momentum unto its own, right? They can't just, it's not like a video game where you can just make the thing that they've created.
Hit the reset button. Yeah.
Yeah. Though King Charles might think differently. He's like, have you tried, turning it on and off again? As far as
yeah, right.
but the practical reality is they needed somebody with the savviness of a Sachs to get out there, who's been charismatic and could put many critiques competently into words with logic of like why the system is going to collapse, why it's bad, but in a way that is designed to try to seduce the intelligentsia, specifically of China first, Russia second, and other nations of the multipolar alliance, right? The global south. That's his purpose, is to seduce them in any way possible, to begin to think that maybe there's something rehabilitatable within that faction of the West that he represents, Jeffrey Sachs, which is, again, the faction that wanted to that did destroy Russia, that wants to just, like Jeffrey Sachs, he's given a whole lecture series at the London School of Economics on the importance of Keynes as the new religion. Like that's he says it. He keeps Keynes's general theory at his bedside table. He reads it every night. There's not a day that goes by, as he says, where he doesn't begin and end the day reading John Maynard Keynes. And he says we should all do the same. He encourages his students to do the same.
It's like his Bible.
It's his Bible. It's his Bible.
Yeah.
And so he's a cybernetic technocrat. Like, he's the arch cyberneticist because he knows that it's a game. He knows that it's not. He doesn't believe, unlike the lower order cyberneticists, the lower order technocrats who are useful idiots. He actually knows it's a game. He's part of the Keynesian higher elite. Like, Keynes was part of the.
He doesn't drink the Kool-Aid, but he makes the Kool-Aid.
Exactly, and he knows how to manage different flavors of Kool-Aid for different people in different parts of the neighborhood who like different kinds of Kool-Aid. He knows the ingredients of the witchcraft, the witch's brew, and so he could play with it with a bit of charisma, with some personality, with some humor, which makes him very dangerous. And I think that part of what he's got is a method or a strategy to try to convince the Chinese that there's something you can trust in the rehabilitated Carney and the rehabilitated Canada and in the better parts, that of the Western system that realize their folly now that they want to have a Saul-to-Paul conversion. They want to have a new type of spirit of trust. They've learned from their errors. And Carney, I think, has been trying to play into that because the British need to use Canada, as they have always used Canada, to destroy the United States, number one, but to also weaken any potential alliance of Eurasian U.S. collaboration, which is how Canada was founded, as you and I have gone through in previous shows. It was designed to prevent the emergence in the 19th century of the U.S.-Russian friendship and around economic development, rail development around Alaskan rail that would go down.
Pipelines, yep.
Yeah, all of that. So they want, that's sort of the mandate of Canada, except now the idea is, I think, to try to loosen, as has been attempted under Justin Trudeau and earlier even Stephen Harper, the conservative prime minister, to loosen the China-Russia bond, economic bond, by persuading the Chinese Russia is ultimately not in your long-term interest. They're too unstable. Their resources are too expensive. When you can get cheaper resources from Canada, we'll make it more. We'll sweeten the honeypot for you to start getting deeper and deeper into enmeshment and dependency in Canada. So they're trying to do that on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're also trying to stay alive and stay relevant, which Trump is not making that so easy as well, by saying, well, look, you need us more than we need you. And that's true. Currently, economic gravitational force between Canada and the US is much, much stronger than anything between Canada and China. And thus the US, Trump has a lot more to bring to the table when he says, well, if you do this, you can do it, but it's going to hurt you a lot. And you may not have much to offer China if you get hurt the way that you might get hurt. So Carney's having to navigate a very difficult kind of terrain.
So is it your opinion, because you were way ahead of everybody else on this Carney thing, but when he was elected, you already had a documentary made about him. You were already you were read in on this guy, tracking him obviously before he came into office. Is it your opinion that in a quote unquote perfect world, or let's just say in an ideal timeline for the World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030 folks, the New World Order folks, the Carneys of the world, would he have always become the Prime Minister of Canada, or because of the multipolar alliance has always been a thing. I mean, 25 years ago, it was Hugo Chavez, Assad, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. They took all those guys out because they didn't have real power projection. They didn't have the military power projection that now is represented by Russia, Iran, and China to stave off the attacks, both figuratively and literally. But it is your opinion that without the emergence of this actual sovereign alliance, plus the populist movement in America, the MAGA movement, do you think Carney would have always been plugged in as the leader, or do you think he had to basically step in to redirect the ship, like you said, because this thing had gone way off the rails from what the 2030 had planned?
No, I unfortunately, I first given a presentation on Mark Carney in September of 2013, and I was doing a podcast back then, and we did one on Carney as the architect of the international bail-in regime, which he was working at the time for the Bank of International Settlements, the Financial Stability Board. And so I did a bit of a bio breakdown, and I had made the point during that time period that it looks like he's being positioned to be a political controller of Canada. I didn't really know to what degree he had just finished his term as the governor of the Bank of Canada, but the amount of propaganda that was being pushed to shape an idea of what Carney was in the mind of the Canadians was already indicating to me that they were propping him up like they had never done for any civil servant or technocrat ever, which was to paint images of him as a hero figure that got Canada through the economic crisis of 2008, 2009 as the savior. So there was already this subtle but very visceral fluffing across the board.
Mythology. There's a mythology they're creating.
Yeah. And I was like, they're positioning him for something big. But then he got called to England for like 8 years. And I was like, okay, maybe they've put that on the back burner. Maybe that's not going to happen, because then he became the governor of the Bank of England and he was doing other things there. But then I realized, well, no. It's still on the table. It's just that I think they had to extract every bit of value they could out of the Justin idiocy. Because I mean, the guy he was a walking joke. Even his handlers thought he was a joke. Blackface,
total cartoon character. I mean, he was he was the closest thing you're ever going to find like a human personified cartoon character.
Yeah. It seems like when I think of like stage plays, the stage play of Canadian politics, he was not even a jester, because a jester has to know what they're doing. No, he was the butt of the joke, but by design. I think that they always had a plan to take it to milk him to the extreme, extract all of what they could out of him, and then ultimately jettison him to bring in a Carney. But they needed a catalyzer to do it.
Bring in the adult. Yeah. Okay.
So in that sense, it's unfortunate that I'm saying it that way, because it is implying a slightly greater degree of managerial sophistication than we would like to give the oligarchical bad guys managing some of the terrain. But I think that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable assessment. I appreciate that. What year did by the way Carney go back to London?
Oh, he was brought in 20. He finished his tour of Canada as the governor in 2012, I want to say, and then stayed as the governor of the Bank of England for till 2019. And then was brought back in to start managing the new Canada in 2020 or so.
That's fast. I was going to guess if you asked me to pin down a year just as a guess, I would have said 2000. Was it 2012 that he went? I've learned from doing the Book of Trump, because I've spent so much time now in like the 20 years prior to Trump coming into office in 2016, 2017 technically. 2012 to 2014 is such a critical time in geopolitics, and it seems like that is when the real shift occurred, where like tectonic shift occurred, where this patriot movement, for lack of a better term, right, a multipolar patriot movement where you have people in every one of these countries making moves towards that. You have people coming into power who are going to fundamentally change the landscape of geopolitics. Xi Jinping, Maduro, Kim Jong-un. I mean, there's a number of people who are now. I mean, Putin was out of office between 2008 and 2012. So it's like 2012 and 2013 was like this critical time that all of these people are coming into office who, for better or for worse, or for whatever role they play in this stage play, as you put it, they're all coming in at that time. So and we're told that most of them, we're told, are like the villains of the story, right? I mean, that's how almost all of them are presented that way. But now we've learned that that's not actually the case at all. So anyway, I was like, that's fascinating that that's when he went to London. Was 2012. I don't know what it means, but it's just one of those things that I make a note of. Before we shift to rants and do final thoughts, I wanted to give everyone a little bit of homework. This movie I watched, my wife like never puts on like these kind of movies. Like if I'm letting her pick the movie, it's always a it's like a chick flick, rom-com, whatever. But for some reason, she put on this movie the other night, and we watched it, and it like just came out like a week or two ago, January 16th. The Rip. It's kind of a throwback because it's like the runtime is less than 2 hours. It's Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and it's basically about like law enforcement in Southern Florida versus the cartels. That's like the premise of the movie, right? And apparently it says it's inspired by true events, maybe. But I want everyone to watch that movie. I'm not going to tell you why I'm telling you to watch the movie. I want everyone to watch that movie, and then when we come back next week, it'll be very clear when the credits roll why I'm assigning this movie. So just watch that movie, and then we'll just talk about it next week, because
all right,
you'll watch it and you'll be like, that's why. When the credits start, you'll say, that's why he told us to watch this movie. Because it's very applicable to what we talk about on this show and really every other show.
The executive producer was Xi Jinping, by the way.
Yeah.
no, that probably is not true. I know. I'll definitely watch it. That sounds like a fun homework assignment. All right, everybody, you heard that?
Yeah.
Take note of the movie, and we'll chat about that next Wednesday. So, any other questions or rants or anything to go through?
Let's see if we have any boosts. And if you're listening to this on replay, go to badlandsmedia.tv/boost, and you can basically leave a Rumble rant at any time.
Okay. Just quick, I'm noticing Brett Hour just there's a couple of questions I just flagged here. One of them was, what about the Sassoon and Sackler families? Sassoon, super evil, high level. It's kind of like a Rothschild esque Hofjuden family that was assigned by the British Empire to do the dirty work of managing the British Empire's opium war and different assets across China. They built a big dynasty, and they still exert a lot of influence over a big chunk of a lot of the economic dynamics of China, especially Hong Kong. Sackler family, also a lot of interests in China, but they're also the head of the Purdue pharmaceutical complex, which was behind actually our drug problems. So the Sackler family and Purdue is what got OxyContin onto the market and created an OxyContin crisis back in the late 90s, which then transformed itself into a heroin crisis with the U.S. control of heroin coming out of Afghanistan, that the U.S. was controlling like 90% of the heroin was coming out of, U.S. dominated Afghanistan. And so people who couldn't afford OxyContin, but they were addicted because we had 7 million addictions by 2001, all of a sudden found heroin a lot cheaper and got onto heroin until fentanyl started getting cut into heroin when we started changing and moving away from the Afghan opium production thing as the drug trade. We started moving towards chemical synthetics, and you began in 2013 seeing cuts of fentanyl beginning to be infused. And again, Purdue was behind a lot of that.
Interesting.
The Sackler family is very important.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Okay, so I think we hit everything. Everyone hit the thumbs up. I will say this: I am going to do at 2:00. One of the reasons I wanted to end a little early today is to prepare. I'm going to do a 2:00 special edition of Geopolitics with Ghost. I stumbled onto something last night, doing the news brief takes. It appears that Iran is now in a continuity of government, not just a continuity of government protocol, but they are in it looks like devolution, where the centralized power of the Iranian government has literally been devolved to the 31 governors of the 31 provinces, because they were anticipating that there was going to be a shakeup, something significant was going to happen. And it also appears that the reason they did this was to rebuild their intelligence infrastructure and security infrastructure because I think it had been compromised by.
Do you think it might accompany? Oh, do you think it might accompany an attack by the U.S. fleets?
Well, I don't know if we're actually going to see an attack by the U.S. fleets, but I think what happened is that Mossad had spent decades, and the CIA and all their partners had spent decades infiltrating the Iranian infrastructure, and basically what we saw happen over the past month was the green light being given to all of those assets to start the color revolution, but it didn't actually materialize, and now thousands and thousands of these operatives have been killed or imprisoned, and basically like that's it. Like they can't do it again. That was kind of a one time move, and they made their play, and it didn't work out because they didn't get the support that they were expecting, I think, from the U.S. military and USAID or whatever. So I'm just going to go run through that, like pulling documents, pulling reports, and this goes back to like at least September or actually August, where they created this thing called the Defense Council, anticipating that they were going to go into a continuity of government protocol. And it's fascinating. So join me at 2:00 here on Badlands Media. I'm going to spend probably like an hour running through that. And we'll just see how that goes.
Awesome. All right. Well, so you heard it, folks. 2:00. Tune in to Ghost of Base Patrick Henry to deal with to jump into what's going on behind the scenes around Iran. And I guess without further ado, we'll just I forgot an ad, but I guess not the worst thing in the world. Should I read that last ad? I forgot about it.
Yeah, go ahead and do the ad, and then we'll get out of here.
All right, let's do that, and then we'll wrap it up. So the last one is soft disclosure lotion. Here we are.
I don't say this lightly. This lotion changes people.
My knuckles would actually start to crack. Started using the soft disclosure lotion, and I am very impressed. Even within just a few days, I've noticed a tremendous difference.
That's not a script. That's what happens when something actually works.
It puts the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Yeah, that line keeps coming up. Because when you don't use it, your skin starts acting up.
Every single ingredient in soft disclosure is intentionally chosen. There's no filler ingredients. It is not like this BS product where they have a bunch of ingredients. Every ingredient listed is for a purpose.
Over 65-star reviews for the lotion alone. Not influencers, not actors, just people whose skin finally shut up. Soft disclosure lotion. Once you try it, you'll understand why people won't stop talking about it. Visit softdisclosure.com and use code Badlands and get 10% off.
All right. So without further ado, take it away. Final outro ad of the day. All right. Bye, Gordon. Have fun at the 2:00.
All right. See y'all later.
See ya.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.